report came in at 5 o'clock Mobile time. Hurricane warnings are in effect from Grand Isle, Louisiana to Apalachicola, Florida. All precautions over the Mississippi Delta region of southeastern Louisiana should be completed. Elsewhere in the warning area, action should be completed before sundown. Residents who live on offshore islands or in low coastal areas subject to flooding or being cut off by the predicted tides should relocate inland.
A hurricane watch means that a hurricane is threatening a coastal area and people should take note. A hurricane warning means that the hurricane is moving inland and people should take action. 9 out of 10 people who lose their lives in a hurricane are killed by the storm surge.
Hurricanes are misunderstood by many. Sometimes there's even unnecessary fear by those who are thousands of miles away. But one fact remains. Hurricanes are dangerous, and they deserve respect and caution when they're threatening. The purpose of this film is to inform you about these dangerous storms and what can be done to prevent loss of life or property when they threaten. A tropical storm officially reaches hurricane status when its winds reach 74 miles an hour. Heavy rainfall accompanies a hurricane, with more than 20 inches of rain having been recorded in a single day. But the single most dangerous element of a hurricane is a storm surge, or sudden increase of water level. As the storm moves into a coastal area, storm surges from 3 to 10 feet above normal tide levels are common. In many cases, storm surges reach even higher and flood low-lying coastal areas.
Well, without question, the most serious aspect of the hurricane is the storm surge. Now, the storm surge is a dome of water that may be 40 or 50 miles across that crashes across the coastline where the eye of the storm makes landfall. If you could smooth out all the wave activity, this would be the level water above normal that would be experienced. Now, we know, of course, in actual fact, that you have this horrendous wave activity superimposed on top of the level water. Storm surge. 9 out of 10 people who lose their lives in a hurricane lose them in the storm surge. Most of the extreme damage that occurs in the storm surge itself. It's an immediate coastal problem. It's not a problem that is experienced well back inland. The storm surge is a function of the depth of the water just offshore. Places where you have very shallow depths produce a much greater storm surge than places where you have a very deep water. For example, in Camille in 1969, there was 25 foot of storm surge on the Mississippi coast. Now, a Camille type storm, if we make a scale of 1 to 5 and rank all of our storms on this scale, where 5 would be the most extreme storm you would ever expect to have, and a 1 would be a minimal storm, then Camille would rank as a 5. There's only been 2 5s hit this country this century, and that would have been the 35 storm in the Florida Keys as well as Camille in 69. So an extreme storm like Camille, a number 5, produces 25 foot of storm surge on the Mississippi coast. It would also produce 25 foot of storm surge on the west coast of Florida. At the same time, if you'll come around on the east coast of the Florida Peninsula, where the Gulf Stream is located, you would only get 12 foot of storm surge for the same size of storm. So the element that we fear most associated with a hurricane is this storm surge.
Devastation from the storm surge and wave action was witnessed by the victims of Hurricane Eloise, which struck the northwest coast of Florida in 1975. An estimated $150 million in damage was the result. Luckily, most residents of the Panama City beach area heeded warnings and fled inland. As a result, only 1 life was lost, and that was due to a heart attack, not water or wind. Wise boat owners have taken their crafts upstream before the storm, realizing there's no safe place for a boat in unprotected water during a hurricane. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were lost when boats were left in the path of Eloise. Boats taken upstream suffered little or no damage. Businessmen found it necessary to move their perishable goods to safer locations, but quickly returned them as soon as electrical power was restored. Large plate glass windows were smashed, later boarded up to await replacement. Some businesses remained open after the storm, despite considerable damage. High winds ripped through the Fort Walton Beach area, ripping up metal roofs, sheds, and whatever wasn't securely fastened down before the storm. A travel trailer on the coast felt the force of the wind and was flipped over on its top. Even inland, trees were knocked over by tornado-force winds, inflicting damage on homes. The result was a massive cleanup job for residents to clear away in the aftermath. Sightseers caused many law enforcement problems during the cleanup and had to be turned away. Many roads were undermined by rising water and wave action. Others were made impassable by fallen trees and downed electrical wires. Inland flooding was considerable but less than expected. Only a few inches of rain fell in the Gulf area. National Guardsmen were sent to the coast to prevent looting and aid in law enforcement such as traffic control. The resort area of Panama City Beach is called the Miracle Strip. Motels and homes that lined the beach were struck by the full force of Eloise. The tide was rising when the hurricane struck. This, combined with the storm surge and wave action, whipped up by the 130-mile-an-hour winds, destroyed or nearly leveled everything in the hurricane's path. A once beautiful strand, now virtually destroyed. It is hoped over the years nature will return the sand which this natural phenomenon washed away in one sudden act of violence. Safety authorities say most loss of life in a hurricane comes when residents ignore evacuation warnings, choosing to stay with their homes. If they had remained in the coastal area during Eloise, hundreds of lives might have been lost.
And it was pretty rough. We didn't realize until the last minute that the hurricane had turned in this direction, and we had planned to ride it out and stay here. But if I had it to do over again, I would never stay here. I think I would get out. I would move on out immediately because we're pretty well closed in this area.
This is some of the views of what left after the hurricane left. Yeah, and I was out here personally until 4 o'clock whenever, and then it struck within about an hour after I had evacuated this area. And you can see plain views of the situation, what things look like out here. Really turned out awful. I was left, went home, came back about 4 hours later, and it's just all gone.
Eloise proved to be an excellent example of why it is vital for coastal residents to keep informed of a hurricane's path, especially if the area is under hurricane warning. The storm can change direction, speed, and intensity in a very short period of time. So it is vital to stay alert to weather conditions under a hurricane warning. On Monday night, Eloise was headed in a northerly direction. Residents of this trailer park in Panama City Beach, Florida, went to bed thinking they were relatively safe, in spite of being under a hurricane warning. However, at 1 in the morning, the National Hurricane Center in Miami issued the warning that Eloise had changed course and was now veering toward the northeast. A phone call awoke the manager of the trailer park. The residents here and throughout the beach area were evacuated, scant hours before the storm struck with all its fury. Law enforcement authorities and civil defense workers were credited with spreading the alarm to those who failed to hear it over radio or television. Luckily, most of the area was not rural in nature, and most homes could be reached in time. If a late report shows that the eye of the hurricane is not near you, there is still a very serious danger from high winds that accompany a storm and extends for hundreds of miles in all directions. If you are in a warning area, stay tuned to the radio and TV. Be alert. There is a real possibility that the storm may change its course toward you. The storm's peril extends for hundreds of miles in all directions. Coastal residents should be aware of the height above sea level of their homes. Much of the area along the Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico is less than 10 feet above sea level. So it is easy to imagine what would happen if a major hurricane with a storm surge of 12 to 15 feet should strike. Should people outside the coastal area worry about hurricanes? They probably won't have to evacuate unless they live near a river or a floodplain of some sort. But they should be concerned and keep informed.
If we move back inland, away from the immediate coast where you're on fairly high ground, then it becomes a problem of wind damage. And we've come to understand that a lot of the wind damage is really associated with tornadoes that are spawned by the hurricane itself. If you look at the damage pattern, the wind damage pattern after a storm, you'll find swaths of damage. We feel that these are probably associated with tornadoes.
Other than wind damage, what dangers occur inland? Millions of dollars have been lost to flooding after a hurricane has traveled hundreds of miles inland and lost its destructive winds.
We now need to turn our attention to the third major problem with a hurricane, and that's the inland flooding, the freshwater flooding. Now the difference between that and the coastal flooding is that you don't have the water action or wave action, so that it doesn't pose quite as severe a threat. Although rivers, places where you have high ground and hills and even mountains, can cause serious problems. In 1974, Hurricane Fifi moved across the north coast of Honduras. Not a very strong storm, only a Category 2 on our scale, and yet somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people may have lost their lives. Those who lost their lives were along a riverbank, and they had tremendous rains up in the mountains. The water came down this mountain river and caused a tremendous loss of life. So inland flooding, riverbanks particularly can be quite severe. In 1972, Agnes, along the northeastern part of the United States, was only tropical storm in terms of its the strength of the winds, caused $3.5 billion damage. So you can have major damage and major loss of life inland with freshwater flooding, but you generally do not get quite the same damage as you do on the immediate coastline with the storm surge type of flooding.
How much warning will be given? How many hours before evacuation? Hurricanes are erratic, but the National Hurricane Center keeps close track of all storms.
Well, the first line of defense for tracking hurricanes in this nation is the weather satellite. We've had satellites in orbit now for nearly 15 years. And with the current satellite, I see my entire area of responsibility every 30 minutes. Now, I mean by that, I see from Africa on the east all the way across Central America to the west coast of Mexico on the west. We have responsibility at the Hurricane Center for all hurricanes in the Atlantic, Caribbean, and Gulf of Mexico. So with the satellite, then I can see a disturbance as it forms. During the summertime, we track nearly 100 disturbances. Over half of these come out of Africa, or 50-some come out of Africa. So with the satellite, we observe them emerging from the West African coast, and then we begin to track them across the ocean. If they show signs of developing into a hurricane, as they approach the United States or approach the islands in the Caribbean, then we would send out our weather reconnaissance planes. The Air Force flies the weather reconnaissance for us out of Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi, and we would send one of these Air Force planes to probe the inner core of the storm to gain more precise information about the winds and the strength in terms of the central pressure and the temperature field.
During the threat of a storm, the Hurricane Center is hooked into a network of radar stations keeping close track of the storm's progress.
Then as the storm approaches the coastline of the United States, we have a network of coastal radar stations that extends all the way from Brownsville, Texas to Maine that would monitor the storm minute by minute during the final hours of progress before it made landfall at one of our coastal areas.
Weather stations throughout the area are constantly monitoring and reporting the winds and barometric pressures. This information aids in forecasting the direction of the storm. One of the best means of tracking a hurricane is by radar. What can the ordinary citizen do? Here are some steps to be taken which will help ensure the safety of your home and family when a hurricane threatens. Check everything outside your home that might be blown away or blown against your house. Protect your pets. Lawn furniture, garden tools, toys, garbage cans, and other loose objects are destructive weapons in hurricane-force winds. Lower antennas. Fill up your car's gas tank. Service stations may be rendered inoperable for several days because of power failures. The best place for your car is in a garage or shelter, or at least in an area where trees are not likely to fall. Boats usually cannot be left in a marina during a hurricane. A marina operator explains why.
In the event of hurricane, we require that all yachts leave the marina due to the fact that the ground here is low-lying. We only have about 4 feet clearance above the spring high tides. The surge of the seas and the effect of the wind on the vessels in the marina would destroy the vessels as well as tear up the marina. A few of the owners have covered dockage up some of the creeks and rivers inland from the shoreline. The rest of the owners must seek what safe harbor they can. And in all cases, this means to get as far inland from the ocean and its wave action as possible.
Small boats should be hauled out of the water, put on a trailer, and moved to a garage or carport if possible. The best place for a large boat to weather a hurricane is in an inland creek or canal. Before securing, position the craft away from the docks, pilings, or overhanging trees. A boat moored in the water should have enough slack in the lines to allow for pitching and rising seas. Mobile homes are extremely susceptible to high winds, storm surges, and flooding. Damage can be minimized if mobile homes are secured with heavy cables anchored in concrete. However, even then, mobile home dwellers should evacuate immediately when so advised.
Now, mobile homes are a fine way of life, but they're not a place of refuge in a hurricane. Even a minor storm, a Category 1 or 2, can cause severe problems to mobile homes. So our advice to anyone who lives in mobile homes and is faced with the possibility of a hurricane coming by is to go ahead and leave and find another place of refuge.
Hurricane Eloise proved the importance of tying down mobile homes. Here's a unit that was tied down properly. It was surrounded by others that were improperly anchored, and this is the result. Windows are vulnerable to both flying debris and wind pressure. Board up or put storm shutters on. Drawn drapes and Venetian blinds can give some protection against flying glass. A hurricane may cause prolonged power, water, or communications failure. It is recommended that a household stock up on the following articles before a storm: a first aid kit, flashlights with spare batteries and bulbs, candles, a gasoline camp stove or canned heat, a fire extinguisher, and a battery-powered radio. It may be your only link with the outside world during and after a hurricane. Make sure you have plenty of water for drinking. Your town's water supply may be contaminated by flooding or otherwise damaged. Buy food that requires no refrigeration and little preparation. Frozen food in a home freezer can remain safe if measures are taken in advance. Turn the temperature control to its coldest setting. Even if there's a power failure, a freezer should keep food in satisfactory condition up to 36 hours if it is kept closed. If the power goes off, wrap the freezer in blankets for added insulation. If a member of your family relies on special medication, make sure there's an adequate supply on hand. During a hurricane, don't go outside during a sudden lull. The center of the hurricane, or the eye, may be passing over your area. If so, the sky may clear and the wind may cease for as long as a half hour. Unless you must make emergency repairs, don't go outside during the lull. As the hurricane proceeds, the eye will move on, and the turbulent winds and rain will return very quickly. After the hurricane has passed, the danger is not over. Do not eat foods that may be spoiled because of lack of refrigeration. When using emergency cooking and lighting, take extra precautions to prevent fire. Remember, there also may be gas leaks in the neighborhood which would prohibit use of open flames. Provide plenty of ventilation when using gasoline-fueled camp stoves. Do not drive unless you must. Roads must be kept clear for emergency vehicles, and debris-filled streets are dangerous. Along coastal roads, soil may be washed from beneath the pavement, causing the highway to collapse. Bridges may be weakened from pounding by the waves. Beware of broken or low-hanging power lines. Trees that touch power lines should be considered dangerous. All damaged utilities should be reported to authorities. Unless you are qualified to render emergency assistance, stay away from disaster areas. You may hamper first aid or rescue work. If you use common sense and recommended safety practices, you will escape injury. The best defense against the dangers of a hurricane lies in a healthy respect for the storm and preparation, not complacency and not panic.
A hurricane watch means that there is a hurricane near our coastline, and it does pose a threat to your given location, and so you need to be aware of it. You need to stay in touch with the radio and the TV and your newspaper, so that if this hurricane decides to come on shore, that you'll be prepared. Now, the warning itself says that the hurricane, yes, is coming, and now begin to take action immediately to protect your life as well as your property.